So we're going to talk a little bit here about how to design a good survey, or at least a decent survey, in hopes of getting a higher response rate. My first suggestion to you is to write a short questionnaire. If the questionnaire is too long or the survey is too long, people are not going to do it. Nobody wants to answer a 100-page survey on how their dinner was. You got to write questions that are easy to understand. Understand that if you write your survey so that a 9 or 10-year-old could read it, most adults will probably also be able to read and understand the survey. This just helps you to communicate more effectively with people. Don't use technical speak or abbreviations or slang. Remember, when you write, it's not like how you're speaking. You write more formal. So you can write more formally, and that'll help people understand the intent of the question. If you write technical speak, people might misunderstand what you're asking. Same thing with abbreviations and slang. Just write the words out and don't use any slang, pretty much ever. Yeah, keep the questions as short as possible, but no shorter. If you're going to ask somebody, do you enjoy popcorn? Ask the question, do you enjoy popcorn? Don't say enjoy popcorn or popcorn question mark. Write a full sentence, but don't be overly flowery. Avoid compound topics. Yeah, if you write a question that asks two things, you're not going to get the answer you want. Let's read this question real quickly. Do you like to sit and watch the Pittsburgh Steelers play football and eat popcorn? So if you say no, are you saying you don't like the Pittsburgh Steelers, you don't like popcorn, you don't like them together? That's kind of complicated and kind of confusing, so let's not do that to people. Avoid leading questions. Yeah, if you read this question, you'll understand what a leading question is. Just ask a question. We don't need all the extra commentary. Don't never use no double negatives. There you go. I think enough said with that. Too many negatives makes it confusing. And again, we want to be clear with what we want, and we want the reader to understand and to answer the question correctly. That's it. So let's talk about types of questions. There's closed questions and open questions. So let's go over those quickly. A closed-ended question is just that people have some choices to respond to. Open questions, people just write. Closed questions are better unless you're writing an emotionally based question. And it's good to gather categorical data. I'll give you some examples of closed questions here in a minute. One type of closed question that you see all the time is called a Likert scale. On a scale of 1 to 5, I like to watch football, and then they can agree with the statement or what have you. And in a moment, I'll show you a scale that I think is pretty decent. So when you use a Likert scale, make your scale reasonable. And here's a scale that I suggest for you. If not, you can Google Likert scale. And people have also written other ones that are pretty decent out there. You'll notice there's only 5 choices here. It's just a 1 through 5. It's actually easier for people to rank something 1 through 5 than 1 through 10. Closed-ended questions. So you want to limit your choices to 5, like I told you. Make the choices distinct from each other, and try to make the choices comprehensive. In other words, don't say what type of animal do you want as a pet and say dogs or cats. People might want birds or ferrets or something else. So try to make sure your list is inclusive. And if it's not, you'll usually want to include either a none of the above or an all of the above or an other, or even this other here with a line. If you put other with a line, then people can write in their own thoughts. And that's why we can have a lot of categorical data, but then also try to gather some additional data. Another type of closed-end questions are called ordinal questions. And this is where we rank the importance of each class. Place a 1 through 5 with 5 being the most important. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something like that. Of course, AP Statistics is your most important class. Categorical questions such as what is your gender, what's your natural hair color. And here's the last categorical question, numerical. How many siblings do you have? Even though there's a line, the reason why this is closed is because you're not going to have somebody who has 450 siblings. Generally, you're looking at a number between, 0 to 8, 9, 10? The only problem I have with this question as it's written is make sure you know your audience. If your audience is limited English proficient, or they struggle with the language, or they're younger people, instead of siblings, you may have to use young brothers and sisters rather. Here's something about open-ended questions. Remember, open-ended questions like an essay or a free response question. If people want to expand and explain their position, that's good. If you're trying to analyze data, it can be difficult because two people can write two different things, but really they're saying the same thing. You have to really interpret what they're saying. So it's also time consuming. If you have to read a whole bunch of essays or short responses, that can take a long time. So I have a few other things to go over with you before we end this. And it's a few more suggestions. You want to make your survey interesting. If it's boring, people are going to get bored and they're not going to take your survey. Recall questions. Hey, you ask people a recall question like, how many times in the past 3 years have you eaten at Carl's Jr.? Are you joking? I have no idea. If you ask people a question, ask it more like, how many times per week on average do you eat at Carl's Jr.? Or something like that. Ask people to recall a week or 2 weeks. Don't ask for a year. That's crazy. Logical order. Hey, ask your questions in a logical order. Don't switch topics constantly. And here's an example. When you switch topics constantly, you confuse people, and that's no good. Just a few more to go. Test group. You know what? You write a question, have somebody else read it. Because when you read it, you don't catch spelling mistakes, you don't see what people don't understand about your question. Have somebody else read it. Or a couple people read your question to make sure they understand the intent of the question. You want people to understand what you wrote because you know what you wanted to ask. Yeah, you got to decide how you're going to ask questions. And there's something that's really important here. You have to have people's trust. And if you're asking people stuff, they're going to generally want it to be anonymous. They might share something with you, but they really don't want you to go out and put their business out for everybody. Also, if you're asking people personal questions, have them categorize things like how much money do you make? Give people some categories. Or third person. Ask people, how do people usually feel about school? How do people feel about cheating on a test? That'll give you an example of how, or an indication rather, really probably how they feel. So ask it a little softer. And of course, you can have people either have written or oral questions and written or oral answers. If possible, try to go with written questions and written answers. It takes a little bit longer, but when people hear a question versus read it, I think it's a difference. Same thing with writing versus just orally answering. Now, there might be some times when you want to orally answer and ask questions, but given your choice, you're going to want to have written questions and answers. Instructions. Okay. You want to have written instructions someplace, even if you read it to them. And if you're giving a survey to a group of people, read the instructions. The reason being is you want to have everybody to have the same experience. And you want to make sure that your instructions are clear. And by writing them down, other people can read your instructions and make sure they're clear on what you're asking for. So that's important. It has to be written at the 4th grade or 5th grade level. It's got to be written simply. You got to keep it simple. When you have a survey, put more familiar things up front. If you ask people, what's your gender? Hey, most people know what their gender is. What's your age? What grade are you at in high school? Things like that people know and they don't have to think about. Then you can start going to a less familiar topic. But you want to catch people's attention right away. Avoid similarities. If you say, do you like T-bone steak? Do you like porterhouse steak? It's like, really? I just answered. How many steak questions are you going to ask me? Don't make things too similar. Unless, of course, it's a survey about steaks. But try to avoid similarities. Personal questions go in the middle of the survey. I'll tell you why. People remember the beginning and the end, not the middle. That's just a fact of life. And end with easy questions. An easy question at the end may be a question such as, was the survey too long? How much money do you make in whatever category? Something like that. Into 1 or 2 easy questions. People remember the easy questions at the beginning, easy questions at the end, and they're good to go. And they'll tell their friends to take your survey. And the last thing is about bias. So you guys can read this, but I'm going to tell you that when you're doing stuff, you have your own bias. You need to try to let that go. Just because you believe something's to be true doesn't mean it is. Because you're going to have enough bias with your subject or the people who you're asking questions, they're going to be biased. And you want to try to reduce their bias as much as possible. And also you don't want to put your own bias on them. And if you have people write a survey and you make sure it's anonymous, that helps people be a little more honest and reduces bias. One of the ways you can show people it's going to be anonymous is to have some type of locked or sealed or taped up box, and people see you take a survey and put it right into the taped up box without you reading it right away. That engenders trust on people. And that's all I have for this.